Welcome, everybody, to Tacenda Capital's podcast, where we discuss global investment trends and wealth building strategies. I'm Alban Jerome, a General Partner at Tacenda Capital. And today we're going to be focusing on Asia, which has been driving global trends and market changes for the last few days, especially given that it's a big momentous time over there. It's the Lunar New Year kicking off this week. And I have with me, as always, Ajay Malhotra, an expert and an experienced investor with decades of knowledge and know-how how to make money in the pioneer markets. Ajay, over to you.
What makes an experienced investor is that you've lost more than anybody else. So, thank you. Thank you, Alban. Thank you for inviting me. Glad to be here.
So Ajay, let's start off talking about what we would cover a bit in last week, which was about the Western market and how there's a lot of changes happening with Trump coming into power and all that entails,
Do
right?
you wanna talk about Colombia? Because hey man, I would hate to be in the Colombian president's shoes, right? So I don't know if everybody followed it. So there was a military plane full of Colombian deportees trying to land in Colombia. It was refused rights to get into Colombian airspace, and so it had to return back. And what Trump did was typical Trump move, where he says, "Hey buddy, 25% tariff starting today, 50% tariff next week onwards if the situation is not rectified." The president of Colombia got back on call and he said, "Buddy, hold on, chill. I'm gonna send my own presidential plane to pick up all of these people." So yeah, but I think it's a show of strength that I think was very important and very missing in the industry. If something's right and it should be done, then people should have the strength and the conviction to do it. The only thing that I feel is that right now he's trying to right the wrongs. Right? There've been so many wrongs, there've been so many weak decisions, and Trump's trying to right the weak decisions and right the wrongs. I don't know when it'll change over and turn over to pure bullying everybody rather than righting the wrongs, right? Because we humans follow our winning formula. So if winning formula gets us a few wins, we go like, aha, this works for me, right? And we keep doing that. And you notice this in everyday humans. Somebody's nice and bending over backwards nice to everybody. Somebody who portrays strength through his entire set of relationships. Right?
Exactly. And I think that's the beauty of what Trump is trying to do, right? Even in his campaign trail, he was like, let's correct the wrongs, right? And even now, if you look at his policies, he isn't saying no to immigration. And I think that is a big distinction a lot of people are failing to see. He's only insisting that people are illegally within the country leave the country, which is a fair ask for any country in the world. I mean, even Colombia, if I remember,
Except for Canada, maybe Canada loves illegals, right?
well, I
So,
don't know.
I
I
mean,
mean,
if
this year
all
they've been harsher than they were in the last
all
few
illegals
years.
get deported out of Canada, who's gonna break into stores? Who's gonna steal from the stores? Who's gonna steal your cars, man?
Hey, isn't it true that you could probably pick up a better Canadian car in Nigeria than you can do in Canada at this point?
Oh, and way more cheaper. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Where did all the Range Rovers go, buddy? They're sitting in Nigeria. Yeah,
I
it's
mean, it is
Justin
what it is.
Trudeau has been so bad for the Canadian economy. We've talked about it a few episodes ago,
Yes.
that the government has very straightforward three things that they have to do, right? And he's failed to do those things repeatedly. Yeah, and to the extent that I looked at a picture yesterday from some mall where
Mm-hmm.
there's a jewelry store and they're getting all ramped up for Valentine's
Yes.
Day, and all the jewelry stores are like prisons,
Mm-hmm.
caged all over, right?
Yeah.
And I can't blame them. I mean, they were getting robbed, broken into on a daily basis, right? So I don't blame them. But what does this reflect on us, right? I looked at that and I remembered scenes of stuff from the most ghetto neighborhoods in
Mm-hmm.
Miami,
Okay.
where, this neighborhood was so bad that even cops would hate to patrol that neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you would see things in the pawn shops, right? They'll
Okay.
have bars all over because people will bring their jewelry or their guns or whatever, and they'll pawn it for money. So this was the lowest of the low neighborhoods, the lowest of the low crowd out of those neighborhoods going to pawn the stuff that they've stolen or they have it themselves and get some cash for it, right? 20 bucks for a gun, 40 bucks for a gun. They probably want to either feed their kids, nobody knows, either feed their kids or take a hit,
Mm.
get stoned. Nobody knows, right? And I'm
Yeah.
not going to judge them for stuff that I do not know about them for a fact. But the fact is, what I saw in the lowest of the low neighborhoods and the lowest of the low shops dealing with the lowest of the low people, that I'm noticing now in malls, in mid to high end malls in Canada.
Which is a shame because Canada has never been like that. Historically, it has been a country that's been very welcoming, very open, and trusting of their neighbors. I've heard stories as way back as what 5 years about people joking that they never lock their doors, right? I mean,
2009, fact of the matter,
mhm,
2009, 2010, I would, I've been out of the house a lot of times and
mhm,
failed to lock the door.
mm,
Failed to close the garage, and the garage side door is usually open from inside. Um, you know, been out for an entire day, nothing happened. Some neighbor would pass by and say, "Oh, I noticed your garage door was open." And so I pressed the button to close it. And by the way, I swung by your front door, noticed that was open too. So I closed your front door and then came out of the garage and then closed your garage door by the button outside. Right. So, but never had to worry about it. No camera systems, none of that. And now you can't have a day with somebody not robbing you on gunpoint or stealing your cars or cars of your neighbors all the time. So, from a law-abiding, honest, good-hearted country, Justin Trudeau's destroyed this entire country and made it really the Syria and the other countries that we wanted to bring refugees in to give them a better life. They didn't get a better life. They
yeah.
spoiled the better life of all other Canadians.
I agree. And Ajay, here's what really saddens me, right? I've been in Canada for 5 years, and the last 6 months, I've been noticing a very increased number of homeless people. And when I mean homeless people, I'm talking about refugees who become homeless. In the past, homelessness was usually limited to people suffering from mental illness or people who had lost all hope with drug use and such, right? People who needed a different type of care. But these are refugees who've come here looking for a better life, and now they're completely homeless and they're completely without a support system. So the very people that's supposed to have been brought in for their own good are being, like are miserable and uncomfortable, and they have no way to go back either, which I think is a big failure on the entire program.
It's a disaster, man. It's a disaster. You and I and everybody has some thoughts on how to make it better. So Pierre Bolivia was talking about this too, and this is on Yahoo Finance, where Toronto has to declare a food insecurity emergency. More than 1 in 10 Torontons face hunger as crisis grows beyond capacity. Right? So this is something really, really strange. We never thought that something like this will happen in a country like Canada. And you know, the, just crazy times, just crazy times, and goes to show how the liberal politics did not work out, did not work out, right? And why did it not work out? Because it's not the job of the government to give handouts and send the money overseas for foreign wars that we have nothing to do with. The job of the government is to defend the country, keep the people happy, keep taxes low, and give businesses a fluid playing field to kind of play in. And that's what they failed to do.
Charity starts at home, Ajay. That thing, that's something a lot of governments fail to remember. There's a reason why it said that, right? You have to take care of your own, and that in turn will give you enough of muscle power to do outward stuff. In our case, we forgot to take care of, as you said, the very basic, the weakest parts of our own citizenship, our own residents, and that's why we are facing a lot of these challenges. And and this is unfortunately been the trend, right? When the market goes to altruistic, and that's always going to be a challenge. uh, Getting back on
Do you
our
think though,
Mhm.
do you
Go
think
ahead.
though, before we get back on it, do you think though that any of the newer candidates have it to be able to face Donald Trump, fight for the country, and not just, kind of bring a little bit of civility back in, but really like make Canada great again?
At this point, every politician is flexing their muscle, trying to be Trump light. at least on the conservative side. The liberals, of course, are busy dismissing him as the great evil down south. So I think there is some chance with Poliv being able to flex his muscle. But again, with politicians, I always believe campaign trails don't always translate into policy once they come into power, right? Because at that point, it's a lot of horse trading and so forth. Trump has
Like I
been,
would like to see, I would like to see Pierre Olivier not just be Trump light, but be Trump strong,
yeah,
right? So like we don't need a diluted Trump, for all, we need an even more bolder Trump for Canada.
that is true. For a lack of better comparison, maybe we need a wartime prime minister like Churchill was, right? I mean, what's
Exactly.
oh, he wasn't great at peacetime, but he was amazing at wartime. Maybe at this point in Canada, we need to start declaring our economy at a war footing because being the second largest country doesn't really mean much with trillions of dollars of resources if we are in an economic down spiral.
And if your defense sector is so weak that somebody else can say you can become our state.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a bit embarrassing. I'm not going to lie on that.
Yeah.
And I think we should move to some more wonderful, nicer news. We have the Lunar New Year starting this week. It's the year of the snake, which has its own connotations and plus points for people investing. Uh, we spent over $1 trillion, Ajay. I don't know if you saw the numbers just during Christmas season, right? In North America. And the population here is barely 400 million. The Asian market is close to 2 billion people. What do you think the market's going to be in the next 2 weeks alone when they're kicking off their New Year's?
So, dollar for dollar, the spend may not be as much, right? Because the
Mm-hmm.
American dollar is overinflated. So we have to always count the purchasing power parity in place, right? And purchasing
Okay.
power parity is done through multiple forms. One is McDonald's index, but I think McDonald's index is also very deviant, right, in favor of the US dollar. So what
True.
happens is in US, everything's very financialized.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Everything's measured in terms of how much money we're throwing to it. And, we could perhaps later talk about DeepSeek also because it's not whether you're throwing $100 billion or $500 billion or $1 trillion or $36 trillion, what you've thrown away right now, but what you get out of that money. Now, the problem is you actually end up measuring productivity or per capita growth of productivity also in dollar terms, right?
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that I wanted to bring about in conversation, right? Like you said, dollar to dollar comparisons don't typically make sense. The dollar does also, because of its very nature in the Asian markets, go miles ahead than it would go in America or even in Canada. So given that, what would you say is a good way to indicate purchasing power in that market?
Well, a good way to indicate purchasing power in that market is to rely on one-to-one comparisons, right? Apples to apples, oranges to oranges.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you that the price of a washing machine, and there were washing machine wars, and there were all kinds of tariffs placed on washing machines. But the price of a washing machine in the United States is close to $600 to $900,
Okay.
right? You could pretty much get the same washing machine for $70 in China.
That's almost a tenth of the cost.
That's almost a tenth of the cost, right? So, now do the comparisons, right? So, if you're expecting $100 billion, $150 billion of spend there, then in their currency, it's pretty much 10x of that.
That's pretty good indicator of that. And would this also translate across the board into, say, your luxury goods? Would that also talk about people wanting to travel, given that in the holiday season, travel is a big spend for a lot of families, right? Does that translate into the Asian market as well, or is it more family centric? People prefer to come to family rather than leave family and see the world.
So two questions you asked here. Number one is, does it translate to luxury goods?
Mm-hmm.
And no, it does not translate to luxury goods. Luxury goods, by their pure definition, are Peloton products, which means the more they charge for it, the more there's a demand for it. So there's just all luxury good brands put together burn or incinerate about $1.5 billion, and that's on cost price basis of the luxury goods every year,
Okay.
just to keep the demand high. Okay? So whenever you're going out there to buy a luxury product, remember you're paying for some part of quality. I wouldn't say that the quality is not there. There's obviously an element of quality that allows you to build that
Hmm.
brand on it. But what you're paying for is the branding, the advertising, the profits, and all of that. Right? And if you're comfortable with that, then by all means pay for it. And luxury goods by default are more expensive in growing economies like India, China, although China shouldn't be called a growing economy anymore,
Hmm.
but they're more expensive there than you can get them in a mall in Florida, right? So because in a mall in Florida, it allows you to build volumes because of the spending capacity of the Americans, right? Versus in the developing economies, it allows you to create the brand value for it.
Got
Okay.
it.
So in an economy that's past its prime and you want to extract as much as possible. So there you make it a volume game. In an economy which is still rising and growing, you want to create that brand value in the eyes of the consumer, and that's why you keep it priced high.
So, Ajay, one of the things that I was hoping to do in today's conversation is to create a couple of relatable parallels, right? For people who've invested consistently in the Western market and are now looking to the Eastern market for growth or investment opportunities, or for people in Asia who have been looking to expand into the Western investment markets, parallels of investment strategy or expenditure patterns. And one of the things that we notice typically is travel is a big indicator of how people spend their holidays. And someone who's from that part of the world, what do you see in the Asian market during the Chinese New Year? Are people traveling back home, and is that the indication of travel spend? Whereas in the Western market during the holidays, it's moving away from your home to newer, warmer weather.
Well, the fact of the matter is that uh, Chinese as a whole do travel significantly, right? And one of the things that is phenomenal to see is that there's so much foresight saying we're going to have X amount of people traveling X amount of flights or whatever mechanism, and if it is left as flights, then we will have X amount of carbon that'll get released in. Now we all know that flights are way more expensive than trains in terms of carbon pollution, and so one of the things that's just so much fun to see is the picture of the rail network in China in 2008 versus 2020. So in less than
I
12
think
years, they've been
exactly.
able to literally cover their entire country with trains, including high-speed trains that travel over 300 kilometers an hour. So every blue line that you're seeing here is a train that travels greater than or in excess of 300 miles an hour, 300 kilometers an hour, right? And then everything that is green is newly built lines capable of 200 to 299 kilometers an hour. So they still travel over 200 kilometers an hour. You look at that and you are just in awe of their capabilities, right? And leave aside, one of the things this is not showing is the north to south, the south to north water travel project, which basically took water from the southern region, which has a lot more water, and moved
Mhm.
it up to Beijing and to the interior of China. I think that entire project we'll discuss it some other time. So every country should look at this. And why is this done, right? Why is the train network made so extensive? This is because people do travel, and people should be able to travel without doing as much of carbon pollution.
Exactly. And pound for pound, you can get more people moved across on trails than you can do in flights any day.
Exactly, exactly, for a much lesser carbon footprint, right? So yeah, so this is something that we should understand about China. Now, coming back to your topic of investing in China, that's another animal in itself, right? Why is that another animal in itself? Because we have to go to Ray Dalio and understand what Ray Dalio said about rise and fall of empires.
Mhm.
And one of the things that happens is uh, initially if the finance industry is led to take off, then it sucks the lifeblood out of every other industry. Just the nature of it, right?
Okay.
The nature of it being such that money flows more fluidly in that particular industry. So that industry is then able to do more for the employees. So, it's very common for somebody in finance to go ahead and say, you're going to get $1 million bonus, right? Because a few right-timed clicks could generate that bonus for you,
Exactly.
right? Now, when you lose, who loses? We all know that, right? Every loss is socialized and ended up finally paid either by the bank or by the central bank or the government coming and bailing them out. So every loss is socialized, every profit is capitalized. So with that, every trader feels emboldened to take risks and provide leverage. And if you have a market that's returning 7-8%, which is usually the default returns of the market, but if I leverage as 10x, you're now looking at a 70-80% return, right? But you also have the risk that your account may go belly up. But that risk is socialized, and we've seen some really dramatic bank failures too. But the
Yeah.
traders are able to increase their leverage and create huge amount of profit. And when they create that huge amount of profit, they get a huge amount of bonuses, and that incentivizes everybody. I was reading about this hedge fund that I forgot the name, but this was quite a while back. This guy used to come around, and this hedge fund went belly up. They would trade in bonds, but this guy would run the desk of traders and developers at night and just leave gold biscuits for them.
Okay.
Right? This was his way of kind of incentivizing, right? So whenever somebody would come in the morning, they will just find a gold biscuit at their table, right? And so, you know, but what happens holistically is that you are deviating your productive assets, which could actually generate something for your economy, create products of value, create value for the customer, to be able to now go into finance and create this notional value. I believe money has a purpose, and money's purpose is very clear, right? And I think it's the Big Short movie where this guy says, my job is only to tell you when the music stops, and then he's eating his food in the cafeteria, and he says, the only reason we have money is so that we don't have to kill each other over a piece of steak or over getting some food. So money has a purpose, and the purpose is to be able to let us be the best futures of ourselves and not have to kill each other to get something to eat.
Exactly. And I think
So
that's the underlining point of money, right? To make more money, to make it livable in the society that you want to live under, and the quality of life you
exactly.
want to create for yourself.
But then imagine if a society turns around and says that money itself becomes your biggest industry, right? So now all of a sudden, and for some people in the audience, this may not drive the point home. So let me actually drive another point home, right? Medical industry, which is usually healthcare, pharmaceuticals, all of that medical industry put together, is usually expected to be about 5 to 6% of any domestic market. In US, they grew to become 18% of the GDP of the country.
Wow.
Right? So they're about 3 times more inflated than most other GDPs. Now, could you say that's a good thing? Yeah, it's a good thing for people in that particular industry. They're
But
making
not for the
money
country
hands
or the
over fist.
economy.
But what happens is that any industry that pulls from the universe and brings it to the table can go unlimited, because it's actually bringing from the universe and putting it on the table, right? What is that kind of an industry? Semiconductors, right? It's actually going into the electron world, going into the quantum world, pulling that and putting that on the table.
Yes.
Electricity generation, power generation, space research. These industries, yes, you can grow them unlimited, and every time they grow, they actually pull from the universe and put it on the table, right? And they add to the economy. But when you grow industries which are like healthcare, and I'm splitting life extension from healthcare, right? There's elements of enhancing and pulling from the universe there that I'm ignoring, but you just basic healthcare, right? Making sure people don't die, making sure people are not sick, right? And if that industry bloats up, then that part of that industry is basically consuming in a zero-sum manner the blood of the other industries, right? I'm putting it very visually, right? Like imagine an animal is your GDP and it's running, then every internal thing is literally a parasite slapped onto it,
Mm.
right? If you have higher taxes, then whatever it's feeding, 40% of that is getting sucked down by this parasite,
Exactly.
right? So we all talk about the services industry or the tech industry in US. They did very well because they always had zero taxes, right? Amazon did very well. Could Amazon do very well in Canada? No, they couldn't. Like if Amazon would have been started in India or Canada, it would have still failed a miserable death. The only reason it was successful in United States is because when they were doing online shipping to other states, those were all tax-free transactions.
So there's an incentive to grow, an incentive to innovate, an incentive to make something, like you said, to bring from the universe and put it on the table. Whereas if you are being bled to death by parasites, then you're not really progressing.
Exactly. And then parasites to one point, these are basic parasites. They just extract blood from you. The second layer of parasites, and this is the second evolution of them, is they start injecting things to make sure that they can suck that blood as easily as possible, even if it causes a little bit of harm later, which is the concept of a mosquito,
Yeah.
right? They'll inject a little bit of I'm forgetting the name of it, but a little bit of venom inside, which causes that swelling. But all that does is it causes your blood to flow freely and not
Leeches do the
stop
same thing,
there.
right? They put an
Yeah,
anti
coagulant.
coagulator, which basically means you're going to bleed freely and it's able to sustain itself quickly and then drop off.
Exactly. So now what's happening is that an evolved parasite would actually inject things in to make sure blood's flowing freely over to them. Now in America, what really happened out of that is, I don't know if somebody caused it or it just happened by chance, is that their food got absolutely adulterated. And we know that FDA is the one which manages the drug administration, and most of the money is in the drugs, and they regulate the food as well. So if something could be banned in 50 countries all over the world, FDA would say, "Oh yeah, it may cause cancer, but that's fine. Keep feeding people that because if they don't get cancer, then we have less business." So, so then the parasite takes that form where it actually is injecting anticoagulant, so it can actually suck your blood more efficiently, and that causes the animal to start to die, right? Especially if now a leech on you or me may actually end up sucking only 0.00 some percentage of our blood,
Yeah.
is going to be a pain and a pest, and we can remove it. But a leech on a small little turtle is going to actually end up taking away like a sizable percentage. Now you add 2 3 leeches there and they're taking away 20 30%. Right? The turtle may die, may not die, but definitely is not going to live and flourish.
Exactly. And I think that is it's a very good analogy. It's a good visual analogy to talk about how not looking at your parasites, not looking at the ecosystem will actually lead to more toxic outcomes. I believe, Ajit, it was you who told me that at this point, the only purpose of the fast food industry is to feed oil and salt into people's blood.
Exactly. I mean, I actually spoke to somebody near and dear to me in the fast food industry, and they said we measure ourselves with our ability to inject oil and salt into the food. So the more oily and more salty your hamburger is, the more they take pride in terms of having a product which is better. So they quantify the product based on the amount of oil, and if you go to some fast food places, they allow for a higher percentage of mineral oil in the oil. Now, mineral oil is a known carcinogen, and the moment you put more quantities of it, you will have carcinogen effects that will get into people, which means they will get cancer. Right? Then there's a chemical called TBHQ, which is literally in almost all meats at McDonald's, and that's why my family and I am prohibited from eating meats at McDonald's. So if you're at McDonald's, it's okay for us to take a cafe product, but we will never eat a hamburger there. We'll never eat a meat there. because all of those meats are TB, have a stabilizer or a preservative called TBHQ. And now the thing with TBHQ is it's known to 110% cause cancer. The only question is whether it'll cause it sooner or later, like whether you're going to get it when you're 40 years of age or you're going to get it when you're 80 years of age. But anybody who's eaten a TBHQ laden food, there's almost a 99% chance that they will get cancer.
Yeah, and the saddest part of all it is people blame everything but the food for cause of all of these, from genetic testing to uh, cigarettes to whatnot, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, there all of these are valid factors, but the way they move it away from the root cause is terrible. But actually, is it a more of a North American thing? Because globally, a lot of countries have very, very tight regulations on what can go into food, right? In the Asian market, which is not known to be hyper regulated, how do they manage that? Are they having
It's a genuine challenge for everybody. It's a genuine challenge for everybody. Gutter oil is a big thing in China. People actually salvage as much of oil and skim oil on top of gutters, and they then refine it, and then they bottle it and sell it. And one of the ways that people try to be able to distinguish it is put a garlic in it, and if it turns a little greenish, then it's gutter oil. So now, my take to people is that, and I'm hoping to extend this to my kids too. It's a little difficult, right? They all get used to eating KFC and all of that stuff. Is the only way you could be exposed to gutter oil or you could be exposed to mineral oil is if you are eating at fast food places and you're eating fried food.
yeah.
Right? So just cut off these two things as possible food choices. Number one, do not eat at fast food places, right? There's always a mom and pop shop. There's always a fine dining restaurant available. Go there if you can afford it. If you cannot afford it, just get some groceries, make it at home. Right?
That is so true. Cooking is such an underrated skill. And I was watching this video earlier this year, and some of the questions that they were discussing in that clip was, what are the skills you think is going to come back in the next 4 5 years, given the way the world economy is going? And one of the things that came up was making food from scratch. In just the last 60 years, Ajay, if you look at the grocery purchases of a household in North America versus today, the proportion of fresh ingredients, which used to be around 60% about 40 years ago, 50 years ago, has dropped down to less than 25%, which means everybody's today, when I mean processed food, I should define it as anything that has additives, not your canned carrots or your peas. I'm talking about your pre-made, your heated needs and whatnot, and your seasonings and whatnot, right? That has come down to less than 25% of fresh foods. And I think as people are being more health conscious, and like you said, you're trying to get your kids aware of that concept, people are going to start reacquiring those skills from making food from scratch. It doesn't even have to come from farm fresh. At least the percentage of pre-made ingredients is going to start dropping just
And
purely on cost. Just purely
yeah,
on cost.
and we have to be very, very careful, right? Because they're in the food industry, they're just, traps all over the place, right? So we may open a can of chickpeas and we'll go like, I'm eating a healthy chickpeas, right? And we may say, oh, maybe there's something in the water, so I'll drain that water and I'll wash them with fresh water, right?
Mm-hmm.
The question is, what is the can lined up with,
Yeah,
right? It's BPA plastic. It's soft plastic that leaches BPA, right?
exactly.
So same with California. I was in California and they're like, oh, we shouldn't be drinking off plastic. Sure, let's not drink off plastic. What is the alternative that they brought in? Oh, these aluminum bottles. They're phenomenal. We should drink out of aluminum bottles. The first thing registering in my mind is, usually you have to treat the aluminum with something so that it does not corrode by itself, right? And the first aluminum bottle that I open up and I run my hand on the inside, I'm like, oh, damn, this is coated with plastic. Right?
You're bearing the problem, not solving it.
Yes. So, the incentives in the financial realm are so much more important that it just makes sense to fake it, to put tons of marketing and say to everybody, oh, we're using these aluminum bottles now. and then everybody rallies behind it, and then all of a sudden you take water which is being sold at, let's say, 30 cents a bottle, all the way to $2 a bottle, because you're now upselling it into. So the financial incentives are way overwhelming. And that's, coming back to your question on Asian markets, today, America produces 15% of the goods in the world,
Okay.
but it has 70% of the stock market of the world, right? So there's a clear imbalance.
Whereas the Asian market probably produces what, 50, 60% of the entire goods, but controls 20%?
20% of the stock market valuations,
And that's a
right?
huge disparity, because in terms of just the pure population index, more than 50% of the world live in the Asian markets.
Exactly. So two things that we do not know today, right? And I'll be open in terms of how we're looking at trading it. It's not trading advice, but how we're looking at trading it is, one, we do not know if CCP is going to be open to opening their financial markets, because the financial markets then becomes the tail wagging the dog rather than the dog wagging the tail,
Mhm.
and then ends up taking the entire dog down with it.
That's a very, very valid scare. But that's more of one market holding off. But other markets, like the Japanese market today, is at its 34-year high in the last few weeks. And then you're showing India, you have South Korea, you have Vietnam. They don't simply follow in that trend, which kind of opens the market for investments, but also, as you rightly pointed out, unregulated, it could become the tail wagging the dog.
Exactly. In India, we're already noticing that, right?
Yeah.
The stock market goes up, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and then a lot of the Indian flows in the market are FDIs, foreign direct investors, and overseas institutional investors. And these guys, when they take their money out, then it drops the entire market. Not just drops the entire market, drops the currency along with. So stability and long-term control of your markets should be the vital thing that a government should go for, rather than just blowing it up, right? You can blow bubbles anytime you want, but does that make it a good idea? I don't think it makes it a good idea. But as traders, we have to kind of chase the bubbles, right? Because if we don't chase the bubbles, we're not doing it right by our investors. Our job is to actually follow along in the bubble, make the bubble bigger by following along in it. And then, when it busts, then understand that it's busted, and then capitalize on the downside. So we make money both going up, going down. Hell, we make money even when the market's going sideways, right?
Exactly.
It's the concept of theta decay, which is one of the Greeks used in options. So if you, are counting on that, then you're able to make money even when the market's going sideways. My core rule of thumb is that our inflation, depending on who you talk to, if you're talking to the Federal Reserve people, they're saying, the inflation's 3%, 4%, don't worry about it. If you're talking to a common person, he says, I think the inflation's going up 10%. If you talk to a seasoned investor who's done their research, they say the inflation index that we kind of use is about 14% per annum, right? And that, I believe, is the right inflation metric. And now, if you look at some growing economies, fast-growing economies like India, inflation in India is about 16.7% as per the calculation done by us. So our goal for our investors is to beat that number, right? And so if we're not generating a 20-25% return a year, then we are not beating it inflation adjusted for our clients.
That is very true. And speaking of India, right, Ajay, India is entering a stage from what we can everybody see, massive, massive investments in infrastructure. They have been for the almost a decade at this point, moved very strongly in the digital payments marketplace, to the point they have probably one of the best secure systems for money transfer within the country, peer to peer. No longer like in Canada, I hate to say it, burdened by the banks playing gatekeeper to your own money, right? At that point, do you feel like that's making the market stronger because people have access to capital faster, their own capital for expenditures, for investments, and they're actually putting the money in the right places like real infrastructure and real estate, which have typically always gotten good returns in a upward curve market?
I have a very technical word for India.
Okay.
Okay, so it's a little complex. It's a little technical. It's called stupid, and and I'll tell you why. Okay,
Okay.
India, India is an amazing country. India
Mm-hmm.
used to be 23% of the global GDP
Okay.
when before British came in and took over India, and
Mm-hmm.
they reduced India down to 4% of global GDP.
Okay.
Right? Now, China went through the same thing with their opium wars,
Mm-hmm.
and China made it into their curriculum, and they said we're going to teach our people how we went through a decade or pretty much a century of humiliation,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have to teach people the right history because your history becomes your thinking and your thinking drives your future.
That
Now,
is very true.
what India did in its, obscene wisdom is they wiped it all out, right? There's there's no history. Like you've been educated in India, I got educated in India,
Mm-hmm.
where we ever taught the true history, how we were 23% of the global GDP, where the best silk was coming from India, where the best spices were coming from India, right? Where UAE was actually using Indian rupee as the currency, right?
Funnily, none of this was in our curriculum, but I had a very amazing history teacher who would say, listen, read the textbook, you'll get your exams done. But he would create these debates in our class, a lot similar to what you just brought about. And this was before the internet, right? So we would actually have to read books to come to class and debate stuff. But again, we were an offbeat class, right? We probably were one in a million who got that opportunity. And you're right, we have buried our heads from our own past failures because we're too embarrassed to look at them. And that's probably the reason why China succeeded, because they accepted their embarrassment and learned from it.
Exactly. So does India have huge potential? It's got huge potential.
Mhm.
But every single time you look at India, it's been a mirage, right? Every investor that I speak to says, once in a while, yes, we do tend to get some returns from India. Indian stock market would throw an average of 15% return, while average depreciation of Indian rupee versus the dollar is about 4%. So that's an 11% return. As an individual investor, if you're investing in there, your currency transfer costs are about 1 to 2%. The Indian banks don't tend to give you fair rates while taking money out, and you cannot take money out via Wise. You can take it in, but not take out. Um, and as individual investors, you do tend to have tax deductions at source. So you do have to account for that. And once you account for that, and let's say that impacted you by 3, 4%, 5%, or something like that. So you're now looking at very low returns of, let's say, 4% at the end of it. I just did this calculation a little while ago with a chartered accountant for the money that he was looking at investing,
Mhm.
and and it came out to be a negative return situation when he was looking at investing in just fixed deposits in India. So he's like, oh, if I do a fixed deposit in US or Canada, I'm looking at 3.8% to 4% returns, versus if I'm looking at doing a fixed deposit in India, I'm getting 7.1% return. When we ran the numbers duly, we saw a negative return out of that,
So,
right?
Jay, if I'm understanding what you're saying, that in spite of massive good moves that India has made in the last few years in infrastructure, digital payments, and even fintech, the barriers of moving capital in and out of the country make it almost a losing proposition for individual investors. Whereas institutional investors tend to have a better advantage because of the volume.
Because of the volume, and now the gift city route has opened up.
Mhm.
So that allows free transfer and zero taxation in the country. So institutional investors can take that route. Again, this is where I think India is being stupid, is the role of the government should be, and smart government, right? Incredibly smart government, the role should be that of Robin Hood. Your
Okay.
job is to take from the rich and give it to the poor, but in a manner that you're making the poor work for it, not handing it out, but work
Yes,
for it. Because that money would eventually flow into the coffers of the rich, anyways, right?
true.
So the best way to feed the wolves is actually to feed the pigs, right? So I think that's something that they have to understand today. India still is becoming, very class society, but it's no longer the pundits or the Shudras or the or earlier castes, but now it's the castes of the ultra wealthy and the super wealthy and the have-nothings on the other side.
And
So
given the scale of the country, that is a larger proportion.
yes, yes. So I think that's where I would say that they're being stubborn. The other part that they're being, not very smart again is the crime, right? If somebody can get into Saif Khan's apartment and stab him 6 times, right? And I think there's something bigger going on there, because the very next day or 2 days later or 5 days later, something like that, but in a very short span of time, you have the government trying to confiscate his ancestral property, which
Mm.
is the Maharaja's palaces and the lands around it, worth about 15,000 crores. So I think there's something bigger going on there, which we don't understand. But I think that has to stop, right? Your safety, the safety of your family, the safety of your business, the safety of your money is the primary thing that every businessman looks at, right? We had the
True. What's the
same thing
point of being a
in,
billionaire if you're going to get shot dead and or worse, right? If you remember that incident, one of the most surprising factor was that he was not able to get an ambulance. Living in one of the most poshest parts of
yes,
the city, you're not able to get an ambulance. You had to wave down a rickshaw to be transported to the hospital in an emergency is scary.
it's scary. Yes, yes. So I think, you know, Ray Dalio said it better than I could, but he said, you start looking at those fundamental factors, how well the society operates with each other, how well do they treat each other, right? Are they thinking of the civic spaces as their spaces? Are they keeping it clean, right? Those are the things that builds the fabric of your society. Now, once the fabric of your society is great, you will make tremendous progress financially, right? In fact, the role of the government should be to bring the horses that are driving the growth of finances down, to reel them in so that they don't end up becoming parasitical on the entire thing,
Yeah, I
right?
think people kind of always get the wrong connotations when you talk about wealth distribution. But the fact that they are, if I can summarize what you've been saying, Ajay, is you have to feed the lower ends of the strata for them to be able to buy into the economy and in turn keep the wheels moving. Because end of the day, the top 1% is still the 1%, and controlling vast wealth does not mean it's good for the economy.
Exactly, exactly. And then coming back to your point of Asian market, so my worry is that CCP is way too intelligent and way too smart,
Mhm.
right? And that's very clear with the growth of just the railway network, right? You have to be incredibly smart, incredibly intelligent, incredibly forward-looking, and incredibly hardworking to build something like that, right? As a nation
In 12 years.
in 12 years, right? So, like we haven't even been able to fix the Gardner plate not falling down, right? The concrete not tumbling and falling down from it in the last 12 years. So I've been hearing those stories again and again for the last
Yeah,
12
yeah.
years.
I mean, in the last 5 years, the cracks in the Ghana have gotten noticeably, larger. And I hate to say this, there are days I avoid the Gardner whenever I remember it and take the other route, only for this reason, as paranoid as it
Yes.
sounds.
Yes, yes. Yeah, every time I go underneath it, because there's the road that goes underneath it, it's a gamble. And I do am remembering God at that point. So, if it puts the fear of God in me, I think it's probably doing its job, and probably that's the intent of it. So coming back to investing, I think you make money in the bubble phase, you make money in the crash phase.
Yes.
So if somebody is wise, then they understand that the crash phase is what's outstanding, and you will be making money there, right? So the right positioning, the right way to play options trades. I I usually don't dabble in futures, because futures tend to be regressive in nature. You have to sell the current month, you have to buy the next month, and there's always a component of loss there. So. But there are many ways to play it. Now, what we're worried about is that CCP being way more intelligent and way more long-term minded may or may not let the financial markets go bonkers, right? In long term, you do require investment in the country.
I agree. And I think right now what China is facing is that they've gotten a pretty good control on macroeconomics, but on microeconomics within their own country, they're still struggling with a lot of real estate challenges.
Yes and no, right?
And
It has run
and
too far, too hot.
yes, I mean what I meant to say is that they regulated one part of it, but they were not regulating it the right way in the other side, and that's cost them a lot of headaches, right? People want to buy property, but it's just ludicrously priced.
Yeah, I mean, but let's look at it again, right? Did it
Mhm.
really cost headaches, or was that something that they're fine with, but the rest of the world is kind of worried sick about, right? And what is the cure of high prices? It is higher prices, right? They get to a point that inevitably it causes a crash, right? The other way of saying this is, most most people become very greedy at the end, right?
Okay.
So one other saying that I absolutely love, and you'll hear me saying that over and over again: the bulls make their money, the bears make their money, the pigs only get slaughtered, right? So there comes a time where everybody and their grandmother's throwing money at real estate, and at that point you have to reel it in, right? And CCP was incredibly smart in reeling it in. They came up with the three red lines, and those three red lines reeled in the funding that was going there, and that caused that crash to happen. So it was done. It didn't happen automatically. It was done to kind of regulate that market. Because again, you don't want any market to become a parasite, right? The job of the housing market is to give you a place to live in,
Yeah.
right? It shouldn't be what's happening in North America today, that a greedy investor can buy 40 properties. In fact, in the neighborhood I was living in, there was one house that stayed empty for the longest time. And then one fine day, I see police in full gear, SWAT teams and all surrounding that house. We found out that was being used as a meth lab by a drug dealer. And then we found that a guy, an investor, had given it on a lease to the drug dealer. And this investor had 36 homes, all sitting vacant.
Wow.
Right. So why? Because he was just speculating that the prices will go up, and they kept going up. So there was no need to kind of, and especially after this kind of an experience, the rest were all vacant, right? He said, I'll sell it when I sell it. Till then, they're staying vacant. So the job of every industry is to do that particular thing. The job of the real estate sector is to provide housing, or provide the warehousing or the office space for the industry to grow. The only thing that you can grow unlimited is where you bring from the universe, as Steve Jobs used to say, and bring it onto the table. But anything internal is a zero-sum game. We're basically playing music chairs. Yeah? We're moving it from me to you, or from you to somebody else. So every amount of investment that goes and gets locked into land, or gets locked into housing, and never gets utilized, is wasteful use of money. Now, that money was generated as value by doing something productive, and now you're locking it in and making it valueless, pretty much. You're destroying that value there.
Yeah, and
So
I think a lot of people are forgetting that the purpose of some industries was never about making money, which is what fintech basically did, right? It became an industry not to move money around, but to make money off money, create money out of thin air, whether it's fractals or whether it's investments or whatnot. And like you rightly pointed out, housing was always supposed to have a place to live, not real estate investments. And that is probably one of the many reasons we have a housing crisis right here in Canada as well, because people, like you said, had 37 houses which they rather keep locked up and collect dust and decay rather than let families move in.
absolutely, absolutely. And a rising, when property prices were rising, we as investors went in and we did as much invested as we could, because we knew inflation's coming in. The only way for us to preserve portfolios, and we recommended everybody around us to do that. But from our own personal principal residence perspective, was it right for the prices to increase? No, it was not right. The only thing increased prices do for us is to get higher property taxes.
Yeah,
But other than that, they don't serve any purpose. Like whether I'm living in a $3 million house, or a $5 million house, or a $500,000 house, makes no difference to my enjoyment of that particular house. The house is the same thing.
exactly.
So why should I then be paying $20,000 in taxes versus $5,000 in taxes? So, you know,
That's a very valid point, Ajay. You bought a property for $500,000, and that property is worth $500,000 at that point, and even accounting for all the modernization you do in a period, say 10 years, it's going a valuation of say 5 million is good for you only if you sell it. But you as a resident are actually losing money at that point because you're paying more taxes than the property is actually truly worth.
absolutely. And who can sell that property? Like if you're living in a house, you always need some roof over your head to live in, right? So who
Exactly.
can sell it? The only person who can sell it is who owns 36 homes. So increasing real estate prices only help the investors, right? So they are a huge tax on everybody else because everybody else has to then buy a higher house and pay a higher mortgage. When they pay a higher mortgage, they have less disposable income to go buy food or, pay for their kids' soccer classes or whatever. So it's another form of taxation. So inflation and keeping inflation under control is so important because this is the sneakiest goddamn way you can tax people, and every government is doing that. Their sneakiest possible way taxing their citizens. And that's why I think the Indian government's being not so wise in some way. I'm not going to use the S word again and again because like they're doing a respectable job, but I think if they were doing an even wiser job, they would keep their inflation under control. Because number one, they'll keep their inflation under control. Number two, they'll eliminate taxation completely. India generates only 3% of its revenue from income taxes. Only 3% of their revenue. And
That's
because of
true.
income taxes, a huge amount of capital leaves India and finds space in UAE or finds space in London or finds space in Switzerland or Singapore. The wealthy people in India are all over the place, right? Just 6,500, just in 1 year, 6,500 multimillionaires leave India. Why?
Exactly.
Because they want to take their wealth out of a high tax jurisdiction into a low tax jurisdiction, right? Number one, that. Number two, they want to take their money out of a high scare jurisdiction into a low scare jurisdiction. What happened is UAE ended up releasing their data on Indians that had purchased property in UAE, right? Instead of just serving them legal notices, taking them to court, probably having an expedited process. Remember, this is all that is non-criminal in nature, right?
Yeah.
So instead of doing that, the income tax department in India decided that the best way is to use the Haryana approach or the Danda approach. So they actually arrested everybody and their chartered accountants and their known well-wishers along with, and put them
Mm-hmm.
all in prison, right? So just in a small town in India where I had some dealing, they said over just the last week there've been 70 arrests and they've been just put in prison, and
For what is essentially a civil case.
for which what is essentially a civil case. Now, who benefits out of this? Modi does not, right? But who benefits is the cops,
Yeah.
right? They get to get bribes to treat them nicely, to feed them one tea inside, which is at 100x the price, right? Like everybody at the bottom layer gets to make a lot of bribes and gets to, be really rich. So I think India, like if Modi government's really smart, like if I was Modi government, one of the things I would do is listen, respect. We're gonna bring that back, right? If you're a taxpayer, you're not going to get harassed in this country, right? Uh,
And I think that is what people are forgetting, right? Taxation is not supposed to be looked as a threat, but rather as just a cost of doing business, and nobody then complains about it. But like you said, if I am going to be arrested for owning property, investment property globally, I should be rewarded, not punished, right? Like I would rather
I
move
mean,
out of
you
the
could be
country.
punished saying that you took your black money out somewhere without paying taxes here. So that was the whole concept, right? You took your undeclared money out and you were able to invest it there. And now we found that you have this, undeclared money, illegal money, right? But it's a financial transaction. It's a financial
Exactly.
transaction. You punish it financially. You go ahead and say, hey, listen, we found that you have 1 CR worth of property there, 1 crores worth of property there. And out of that property, we are gonna now go ahead and garnish 60 to 70% of it because you failed to pay taxes and blah, 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 right? But arresting that person and beating them up and hanging them upside down is probably not an approach that's a winning approach, right? Somebody does that once to you. What do? You come out of it and you say, you know what? I think I'm too old and too rich to go to prison again. So, I call up four people and I say, can you get me a residency in Turkey? And they say, oh, just $500,000. And you say, okay, sell everything, whatever you can sell, burn it, and let's go to Turkey.
Exactly, which is what I was telling, right? It has to be a cost of doing business, not a threat, right? Like you clearly said, what they did was a financial transaction that was not declared correctly, right? Now, if I were to make a mistake on my income tax, I have about 6 years to rectify it, maybe give them a fine and say you have now 10 years to rectify it or whatever, right? Create a reasonable window. And I'm sure a lot of them would have happy to resolve it because, as you said, they are too rich and too old to go to prison. They would have moved on and that wealth would have retained in the country. Now, by trying to, and here's the best part, right? Even if they arrested them, there's a good chance a lot of them end up fudging their wealth further because the very cops who arrested them said, pay me a percentage and I will make
Exactly.
your tax bracket drop from the fourth one to the second one, and then you don't have to pay that higher amount. So now the country's actually lost more money than it's actually benefited from because when you're being, like you said, the Haryana treatment, you're more worried about getting out rather than paperwork.
Exactly. And that's why I think that they've been incredibly stupid because looking at it from a common sense perspective, you go ahead and simply say, I only get 3% of it. And because of that 3%, I end up losing 20% of my wealth overseas because people start parking their money outside. There's so much of black market transactions, all of that. And crime goes up and everything, right? So let me just sacrifice this 3%. And this 3% comes from the middle class and the lower middle class, right? Upper class, everybody tends to be a farmer or declare that they're a farmer so they don't have to pay taxes, right?
Isn't Amitabh Bachchan a farmer too?
And I mean, I don't know that for a fact, but the fact is that, there are quite a lot of people that have seen their tax reports and they're all farmers, right?
Yeah.
Including their kids. So,
It is exactly the joke we were making, right? Everybody who is something is on a tax exception bracket because they've acquired that status. Now, for them moving out of the country is a very similar thought process, right? For a long time, if you notice, a lot of them are NRIs, even if they had primary residence in the country, or they held a foreign citizenship for a long time to avoid dealing with the tax challenges. And if they were able to show out of country long enough, they paid no taxes at all.
absolutely. And so this is where I find it very, 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 very incredibly not nice and perhaps the S word that I was using. Number one, you don't teach people about the true history. You don't teach them about the true history. They are undereducated, uneducated, right? They don't know how to make wise decisions. Life is a vector, right? It's a direction that you're going in. When I educate you on the previous points, then you're able to draw the future point. If I
Yeah.
don't educate you on the previous points, you're lost. And that's why you find an overwhelming amount of Indians are lost. They're lost just chasing the dollars, right? Wherever they can. They're literally chasing their tail rather than chasing dollars, but they're lost. Number two, they don't have control over crime, right? Now, everybody talks about the tank ban, and with DeepSeek, there's a lot of ways to bypass that tank ban and get that comment from it. And I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to get into political controversies, but the fact is that the only person that should have control over violence in a country is the government of the country, right? If you
Yes.
get people getting into somebody's house and stabbing them 6 times, not a winner in terms of business. I'll leave it at that, right? Number three, you know, yes, go ahead and tax people, but have one simple uniform tax, right? One of the funny jokes that comes up is if you buy regular popcorn, salted popcorn in a movie theater in India, it's taxed at 6.25% or something around that. If you buy caramel popcorn, it's taxed at 18.75% because it's considered a premium luxury good. Right? Now, can you help me find the right tax bracket for a mixed popcorn bag?
I was going to say, what happens if you throw in gems?
Yeah, but my kids also, I take them to a park here, and one of them wants to buy salty, one of them wants to buy caramel. Why? Because they want to mix it and eat it,
Exactly.
right? And in India, they do sell mixed bags. How do you price the taxes on that, right? So so I think
I
that's
think they
where
create a third tax bracket for
they created the tax bracket.
that.
But So these are the major aspects. Now, do we have green shoots? We have green shoots, right? At times, we do have the highway network that is phenomenal. We do have, as you said, Nandan Nilekani's output to the country, and this guy's done a phenomenal job for the country, both with the Aadhaar system and the UPI system. And so we've got those green shoots once in a while. But India also has a very big hero worship mentality. And that stems from our Bollywood movies, right? And
Yes.
Bollywood movies tend to give people what they ask for. So it somehow stems from our concept of idol worship and hoping some
Well, a
one
lot of
person will come
politicians are
in.
former film stars, Ajay, so there's that.
Yeah, but like it stems from the fact that ever since you're young, you're indoctrinated into idol worship and hoping that one person will come and be your savior. And then you go to the movies and you see that one person beating 300 people in a row. And then all of a sudden it becomes all about that hero culture, right? Everybody's running around and trying to find that one hero. Countries in life are not made out of one heroes. It's made out of organized teams working hard together, right? So it's not about that hero worship. It's about having the right infantry fighting that battle, right? So, and that is a very big cultural transformation that I don't think will happen in India. So overall, I'm pessimistic to neutral about India, and people give me a lot of hard time for it. But that's just my opinion. That's one guy's opinion, and that's my trading strategy. Versus I am optimistic about China, but I'm very watchful about how the CCP would look at financial markets and when comes the time that they would let the financial markets run. The reason DeepSeek came up is because these guys used to be algo traders before, and they were shut down because they were really trading very rapidly, and they were
Yeah.
actually taking a market that was going to go downwards, much faster downwards, and they'll be able to make much higher profits. So their GPU clusters were for algo trading, which they were using earlier. And now they had re-engineered them to go ahead and create the DeepSeek algorithm. And in smart buggers, they did something for 5 million, which I don't know what took tens of billion
I
for
think Altman had said it cost him $1 billion just to train the model,
yeah,
right?
and these
And
guys did
and
it for 5
and
million.
yeah, and I think that also is what a lot of people are failing to see, right? Just because of the massive pressure that is there because of population of that size, that forces you to learn in a smarter way, forces you to be competing with people on an equal level repeatedly. So either you end up swimming or you're sinking. So I mean, we famously call this in India as jugad, but in fairness, it's innovation, right? Finding to do something exceptional with the very limited resources that's available. And given that they were literally banned from using the latest technologies, they took, for lack of a better word, a box of scraps in a cave and built something fabulous, correct?
Exactly. And there's one more aspect that I think I would leave our viewers with and our listeners with is three different countries and three different ways of running them. US way, China way, India way. And let's stick to the tech area of it, right? So India, when the investors give you money, they take your house, their ancestral property, your future earnings, all of that away from you. They get that all signed off from you, right? So the founder of Baiju has to, he says he's not running away, but whatever, right? And, Kingfisher Airlines, the guy has to disappear.
Yeah.
Everybody has to, or what was it, Cafe Coffee Day, where
Cafe
this guy
Coffee Day. And
commits suicide?
yeah, yeah, that was a whole horror story, right? I mean, they were not
Right.
just ancestral power. He was one of the self-made billionaires in India, politically well connected, and yet we know how his story ended.
Yes. So that's the India model, right? And that's the India model of capitalism. The US model of capitalism is, hey, let's print a lot of money, right? And then let's inject this money into banks. And these banks will go ahead and inject this money into venture funds or wherever, right? Or the capital markets. And then, all of these VCs will then go ahead and inject money into startups. And then whichever one startup comes out, make sure there's no competition around it. So wipe out all the competition and make it a financial juggernaut and take it to stock market and create great valuations,
Yes.
right? Apple is only Apple. The only other Android phone producer in US of any recognition or volume is Google, right? Quite surprisingly, and by no means am I insinuating unfair play here, but people know that I can be sarcastic at times. Is they both end up releasing their phones at times at the same price point,
Yeah.
so. Again, I'm not saying anything. I didn't say anything. Okay, but the fact is that the goal is to turn everything into a financial juggernaut, take it on the stock market, maximize the capitalistic outcome out of it. In a city, if there's Uber, it's purely dominated by Uber. If there's Lyft, there's purely dominated by Lyft. There's no level playing field. There's no level competition there, right?
Which is such a tragedy, because without competition, then the market stagnates, right? You end up having not even a first, you get a first mover advantage, and then it's just scorched earth policy, which is great for the
Absolutely.
person running the company, but terrible for the economy, because one, your iteration, your products are iterating, and like you said,
Exactly.
my prices are literally monopolized today. We all know Canada still pays per byte the highest cost for data, and that's because we have three
We have
telcos.
monopolies, right?
Yeah.
So, and in terms of common folks understanding it, right? Imagine if there were 40 apples in United States, right? 40 apples, right? At this point, your broadcasters would be using one of those iPhones for broadcasting. Apple had a solid lead over everybody else, right? But today, their phones are so ugly that you can actually take better quality video and better quality pictures from literally a sub $200 Android phone than a high-end Apple device, in my
Ajay, I don't
opinion.
know if you know this interesting point that you said I should highlight. Yeah, when I was like about 5, 6 years ago, pre-COVID, Samsung Galaxy basically did that. They went to a broadcasting, a media company and said, forget your bulky cameras. These things are like 20 kgs, right? 20, 30 kgs. On a good day, use our phones. We will give you far better quality than you could get in your, broadcast quality hardware. And they actually even made a whole point about it. And the reason they could do that, because the Android market is so fragmented that if they don't consistently push themselves, they become a
They're only
Nokia.
right? So the the only thing that drives humans is that they want to be better than the guy next to them. You eliminate the guy next to them, there's no reason to move forward, right? So then let's look at the Chinese market. So we've compared the Indian market and the Indian capitalism mechanism and the American capitalism mechanism. And now let's look at the CCP or the China capitalism method. And their method is, let's start EV companies. Okay, EV is the future. EV is great. Let's put in a 5-year plan to start EV companies. Okay. There are 134 EV companies. 134.
Yeah.
United States has perhaps two, third one went bankrupt, right? Because some financial things, right? And SEC
I mean, a lot of
also.
EV companies are even pure EV companies. They're just automakers trying to switch to a different engine, for a lack of better, analogy,
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So 134 EV companies, right? Even a conservative estimate says 80% of them will go bankrupt over the next 10 years, right? That's the standard evolution mechanism, right? Survival of the fittest. Not everybody is the fittest. Okay. But what that's doing is it's forcing everybody to become fitter.
Yes.
Right? Now, a country like India would never do that because they'll come to your house in case your company fails, they'll arrest you, they'll take all your money, they'll sell your house, take that money, they'll force you to commit suicide, right? All of that. That's the Indian form of capitalism. US form of capitalism is, hey, if Tesla is taking off, shut down all other companies, right? Send lawyers behind everybody else or whatever, right? Elon's been super, super generous and super nice and open sourcing his patents. Anybody else would have bankrupted every other EV company, just using lawyers and patents. But that's American capitalism for you. Now, Chinese capitalism, which we actually call them socialists, but their form of capitalism, so, in my opinion, a little bit superior, where it says 134 companies, 80% of them would go bankrupt. Banks will end up losing a lot of investment dollars, and we will recapitalize the banks afterwards. Right? They may end
Yeah.
up still losing some dollars because they have to make their wise bets, and that's why they are the banks, and that's why they make money as banks. So they have to be responsible in making their bets. But in case they're making, like in case they end up losing overwhelming amount, we'll come and rescue them as the government.
And I think, Ajay, that's a lot of very valid points, right? Like three distinct parallels.
Flavors of capitalism.
Exactly. Flavors, parallels of capitalism. I think with that, I would like to wind down today's, event. I mean, today's podcast. As always, it was lovely listening to you educate us, those still figuring out the economics of how the different markets operate and look at the key trends and indicators. And I think with the Lunar New Year, I'd like to wish all our listeners a happy Lunar New Year. And,
Yes.
Hope this year is a big blessing to all of you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wish you a very, very happy new year. And with that, let's say our byes. Please like and subscribe to Alban if you like this podcast, and enjoy yourselves.
Thank you, Ajay, and thank you everyone for listening in today with us. As always, like, share, and subscribe to our channels, and hope to see you all in the next week's podcast. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.